Sometimes the most powerful secrets are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to change everything. In military boot camp, where weakness is hunted down like prey and respect is earned through blood, sweat, and tears, one young woman carried a mark on her skin that would shake the very foundations of everything her fellow recruits thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and honor. What started as cruel mockery would end in stunned silence when the truth beneath her collar was finally revealed. The bus wheezed to a stop in front of Camp Pendleton as the California sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt. Sarah Martinez stepped off with 23 other recruits, her boots hitting the ground with a confidence that immediately drew attention. At 5'4", she was shorter than most, but there was something in her posture that suggested she belonged here as much as anyone else. The drill sergeants were already circling like sharks, their voices cutting through the humid air with practiced cruelty. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her dark hair pulled back in the regulation style, revealing only the smallest hint of black ink peeking above her collar. It was barely visible, just a shadow of something more beneath the crisp fabric of her uniform. "Listen up, maggots," Drill Sergeant Rodriguez's voice boomed across the formation. "You think you're tough? You think you know what it means to serve? You don't know anything yet. For the next 12 weeks, your soft civilian lives are over. This is where boys and girls become Marines." Sarah stood perfectly still as Rodriguez walked down the line, stopping in front of each recruit to deliver personalized intimidation. When he reached her, his eyes narrowed. He was looking for weakness, for that telltale sign of fear that would mark her as an easy target. "Martinez," he read from his clipboard. "Age 22. College graduate." "Let me guess, sweetheart. Daddy thought the military would toughen you up?" "No, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I'm here because I choose to be here, sir." Rodriguez circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "Choose to be here? How noble. Tell me, college girl, what makes you think you can handle what we're going to throw at you?" Other recruits were watching now, some with sympathy, others with the cruel anticipation of seeing someone else take the heat. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, measuring her, waiting to see if she would crack under the pressure. "I've handled difficult situations before, sir," she said simply. "Difficult situations?" Rodriguez laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the courtyard. "You think your little college problems prepared you for this? Wait until we get to the combat training, princess. Wait until you're crawling through mud with bullets flying over your head. Then we'll see how tough you really are." The first week was a blur of physical training, weapons instruction, and constant verbal assault from the drill instructors. Sarah pushed herself through every exercise, every drill, every humiliating moment designed to break down civilian thinking and rebuild military discipline. She never complained, never showed weakness, but that only seemed to make her more of a target. It was Private Johnson who started the real trouble. A farm boy from Iowa, with arms like tree trunks and a mean streak a mile wide, he had taken an immediate dislike to Sarah's quiet confidence. During mess hall one evening, as the recruits sat exhausted over their regulation dinners, Johnson decided to voice what several others had been thinking. "You know what I don't get about Martinez?" he said loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "She acts all tough and mysterious, like she's got some big secret. I bet she's just another spoiled rich girl playing soldier." Sarah continued eating without looking up, but she could feel the attention shifting toward her. This was how it always started, the pack mentality that would either accept her or destroy her. "Maybe she's got a butterfly tattoo," laughed Private Chen, a wiry kid from San Francisco who was usually too smart to join in Johnson's bullying. "Or her boyfriend's name written in pretty script." "Nah," Johnson grinned, warming to his theme. "I'm betting it's something really embarrassing. Maybe a unicorn. Or Daddy's little princess in cursive letters." The laughter spread across the mess hall like wildfire. Even some of the recruits who had been friendly to Sarah joined in, grateful to have someone else as the target for once. Sarah set down her fork and looked directly at Johnson for the first time. "You seem very interested in my personal life, Johnson," she said quietly. "Is there something you want to ask me?" Johnson's face flushed red. "I'm just saying, we're all supposed to be equals here. No special treatment, no hiding behind daddy's money or college degrees. If you've got ink, show it. Unless you're ashamed of it." "I'm not ashamed of anything," Sarah replied, her voice carrying just enough edge to make the smart recruits take notice. "But I don't owe you or anyone else an explanation about my personal choices."
Personal choices? Johnson stood up, his bulk casting a shadow over the table.
"We're Marines now, sweetheart. We don't get personal choices. We get orders and we follow them. Maybe if you showed a little respect for the people you're supposed to fight beside, we'd show you some respect back. The mess hall had gone quiet now, everyone watching to see how this would play out. Sarah stood up slowly, and despite giving up nearly a foot in height to Johnson, she somehow managed to make the gesture seem threatening rather than defensive. "Respect is earned, Johnson," she said, "and so far, all you've earned from me is pity." The silence that followed was broken by Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, appearing seemingly out of nowhere. "What's all this chatter about? This is a mess hall, not a social club." "Just getting to know our fellow recruits, sir," Johnson said quickly. "Building unit cohesion." Rodriguez looked between them, his experienced eyes reading the tension immediately. "Unit cohesion is built through trust and shared hardship, not through running your mouth. Martinez, Johnson, you're both on kitchen duty for the next week. Maybe scrubbing pots will give you something useful to do with your hands." As the recruits dispersed, Sarah gathered her tray without comment, but she could feel the weight of 23 pairs of eyes on her back, some curious, some hostile, all wondering what she was hiding beneath that regulation collar. The harassment escalated over the following days. Johnson had recruited a small group of followers who took every opportunity to make Sarah's life difficult. They accidentally knocked into her during formation, made snide comments during training exercises, and created an atmosphere of subtle hostility that the drill sergeants either didn't notice or chose to ignore. Sarah endured it all with the same quiet dignity she had shown from the beginning. She never retaliated, never complained, never gave them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But her silence only seemed to fuel their curiosity and resentment. During a particularly brutal training exercise in the second week, where recruits had to crawl under barbed wire while drill sergeants fired blank rounds overhead, Johnson made his move. As Sarah pulled herself through the mud, her uniform soaked and filthy, Johnson crawled up beside her. "You know, Martinez," he panted, "all this mystery girl act is getting old. We're supposed to be a unit, supposed to trust each other with our lives. How are we supposed to do that when you won't even show us what you're hiding under that collar?" Sarah kept moving forward, focused on the task at hand. The barbed wire caught at her uniform, and she could feel small tears opening in the fabric. "Maybe she's ashamed," called Chen from somewhere behind them. "Maybe it's something really embarrassing. Or maybe," Johnson's voice took on a cruel edge, "it's something that proves she doesn't belong here at all. Maybe our little college princess has some gang tattoos she doesn't want the military to know about." That stopped Sarah cold. She turned her head to look at Johnson, and for the first time since arriving at camp, there was real anger in her eyes. "You don't know anything about me, Johnson. You don't know where I've been or what I've done, so keep your theories to yourself." "Ooh, touched a nerve," Johnson grinned. "What's wrong, princess? Don't like people asking questions about your past?" Before Sarah could respond, Drill Sergeant Rodriguez appeared above them, his face a mask of fury. "What part of maintained silence during this exercise did you two not understand? Johnson, Martinez, you just volunteered for extra PT tonight. Now shut up and move." But the damage was done. Word spread quickly through the platoon that Johnson had finally gotten a reaction out of the mysterious Sarah Martinez. Speculation about her tattoo became a constant topic of conversation, with theories ranging from gang affiliation to romantic disasters to secret military connections. Sarah found herself increasingly isolated as the other recruits either joined in the speculation or distanced themselves to avoid becoming targets themselves. She maintained her focus on training, excelling in marksmanship, tactical exercises, and physical fitness, but the social isolation was beginning to wear on her. It was Private Williams, a quiet young woman from Georgia, who finally approached Sarah one evening as they cleaned their weapons in the barracks.
Williams had been one of the few recruits who hadn't joined in the Mockery, but she also hadn't defended Sarah either.
"Martinez," Williams said quietly, "I just want you to know that not all of us think what Johnson's doing is right. Some of us are just trying to get through this without making enemies." Sarah looked up from her rifle, studying Williams's face. "I understand that. I'm not looking for allies or enemies. I'm just here to do my job. But don't you think it would be easier if you just showed them?" Williams asked. "Whatever it is, it can't be worse than what they're imagining." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her hands working automatically to clean and reassemble her weapon. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "Some things aren't meant to be shared until the right time, Williams. Some secrets are kept not out of shame, but out of respect." Williams didn't understand what that meant, but something in Sarah's tone told her not to push further. She nodded and returned to her own weapon, leaving Sarah to her thoughts. That night, as Sarah lay in her bunk listening to the quiet breathing of her fellow recruits, she touched the tattoo through her shirt. The ink was still tender, even after all these months. It represented something that most of these kids couldn't possibly understand, something that went far beyond their petty assumptions about gang affiliations or romantic mistakes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities for Johnson and his followers to try to break her down. But Sarah had survived worse than teenage bullies masquerading as Marines. She had earned her place here through blood and sacrifice that none of them could imagine. The question was whether she would be forced to reveal that sacrifice before she was ready, or whether she could maintain her silence until the moment was right. Either way, Sarah Martinez was not going anywhere. She had made a promise, and she intended to keep it, no matter what it cost her. The third week of boot camp arrived, with the promise of the most challenging phase yet. Combat training would begin in earnest, and the drill sergeants had made it clear that this was where the wheat would be separated from the chaff. Sarah Martinez had excelled in every aspect of training so far, but Johnson's campaign of psychological warfare was beginning to take its toll on the entire platoon. The tension came to a head during a hand-to-hand combat exercise. Recruits were paired off to practice basic defensive techniques, and Drill Sergeant Rodriguez deliberately paired Sarah with Johnson, perhaps hoping that physical confrontation would settle their ongoing conflict once and for all. "Remember," Rodriguez announced to the group, "this is about technique, not brute force. The goal is to learn proper defensive positions and counterattacks. Johnson, you're attacking first. Martinez, you're defending." Johnson grinned as he squared off against Sarah. At nearly 200 pounds of farm-bred muscle, he towered over her like a mountain over a hill. The other recruits formed a loose circle around them, some eager to see Sarah finally get her comeuppance, others uncomfortable with the obvious mismatch. "Try not to hurt me too bad, Princess," Johnson sneered as he moved into position. "I know you college girls bruise easily." Sarah said nothing, settling into a defensive stance that immediately caught Rodriguez's attention. Her posture was too perfect, too practiced. This wasn't someone learning basic self-defense. This was someone who had done this before. And recently. Johnson lunged forward with more aggression than technique, expecting to overwhelm Sarah with his size advantage. What happened next left the entire platoon stunned into silence. Sarah moved like water, flowing around Johnson's attack, with an efficiency that spoke of extensive training. She redirected his momentum, swept his legs, and had him face down on the ground with his arm twisted behind his back in less than 3 seconds. The takedown was so smooth and professional that it looked choreographed. "What the hell?" Johnson gasped, his face pressed into the dirt. "How did you—" "That's enough," Rodriguez called, but his voice carried a note of surprise that everyone noticed. Sarah released Johnson immediately and stepped back, her expression neutral as if nothing unusual had happened. Johnson scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. "Lucky shot," he muttered, but nobody believed it. What they had just witnessed wasn't luck. It was skill at a level that none of them possessed. "Switch positions," Rodriguez ordered. Martinez attacks, Johnson defends. This time, Sarah moved with visible restraint, clearly holding back as she demonstrated a basic attack sequence. Johnson, still shaken from the first exchange, stumbled through his defensive movements like he was learning them for the first time. The contrast was obvious to everyone watching. After the exercise, the speculation about Sarah's background reached a fever pitch. The other recruits huddled in small groups, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. "Did you see how fast she moved?" whispered Chen to a group gathered around his bunk. "That wasn't beginner's luck. She's had serious training." "Maybe she was in some kind of martial arts program in college," suggested Williams, but even she sounded doubtful. Johnson, nursing his bruised ego along with his scraped face, had a different theory. "I'm telling you, there's something fishy about her. Normal people don't move like that. She's either military already, which means she's lying about being a recruit, or she's got some kind of criminal background." "Criminal background?" Private Martinez from Texas looked skeptical. "Come on, Johnson, you got beat by someone half your size. Just admit it." "It's not about getting beat," Johnson insisted, though his face reddened at the reminder. "It's about the fact that she's been lying to us from day one. Look at how she acts, how she carries herself. She's not some college girl playing soldier. She's something else entirely." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been looking for Johnson since the combat exercise ended. "Johnson, my office." "Now." Johnson followed Rodriguez to the small building that housed the drill instructor's offices, his stomach churning with apprehension. He had been in trouble before, But Rodriguez's expression suggested this was something more serious than extra PT or kitchen duty. Rodriguez closed the door behind them and gestured for Johnson to sit in the single chair facing his desk. The office was spartanly decorated with Marine Corps memorabilia and a few personal photos, but Johnson was too nervous to really take in the details. "Johnson," Rodriguez began, settling behind his desk, "we need to talk about your behavior regarding recruit Martinez."
Sir, I haven't done anything wrong,
Johnson started, but Rodriguez held up a hand to silence him.
Let me finish.
"I've been watching this situation develop for weeks now, and frankly, I'm disappointed in how you've chosen to handle yourself. Martinez has outperformed you in every single assessment we've conducted. Her marksmanship scores are the highest in the platoon, her physical fitness numbers are outstanding, and her tactical understanding is beyond what I would expect from a new recruit." Johnson's jaw tightened. "Sir, that's exactly my point. Don't you think it's strange that she's so good at everything? Maybe there's something about her background that we should know." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying Johnson with the kind of analytical gaze that had been honed through 20 years of military service. "Johnson, let me explain something to you about leadership. A good leader recognizes excellence in others and learns from it. A poor leader tries to tear down anyone who threatens their own sense of superiority." "Sir, I'm not trying to tear anyone down. I'm trying to protect the integrity of our unit." "Are you?" Rodriguez's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you're trying to bully someone who's making you look bad by comparison." "And that's not just poor leadership, Johnson. It's cowardice." Johnson flinched as if he had been slapped. In Marine culture, being called a coward was one of the most serious accusations that could be leveled against someone. "Sir, I resent that implication." "I don't care what you resent," Rodriguez cut him off. "I care about results. Martinez is going to be an outstanding Marine. The question is whether you are. And based on your behavior these past 3 weeks, I'm starting to have serious doubts." Rodriguez opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. "These are your performance evaluations, Johnson. Physical fitness, adequate. Marksmanship, below average. Tactical understanding, poor. Leadership potential, questionable. Do you know what Martinez's evaluations look like?" Johnson remained silent, his hands clenched into fists in his lap. "Outstanding across the board," Rodriguez continued. "In fact, her scores are some of the best I've seen in 15 years of training recruits. So, I'm going to ask you one more time. Is your problem with Martinez based on legitimate concerns about unit integrity, or is it based on your own insecurities?" The silence stretched between them for nearly a minute before Johnson finally spoke. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "There's something different about her, sir. The way she moves, the way she carries herself, the way she handles weapons. It's like she's done all this before. And that tattoo she's hiding, don't you think we have a right to know what it is? What if it's something that could compromise unit security?" Rodriguez set down the folder and leaned forward. "Johnson, let me share something with you that might help put this in perspective.
I've been training Marines for 15 years, and I've learned to recognize certain types of people.
Some come here to escape their past. Some come here to find their future. And some," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "some come here because they've already sacrificed more than most people can imagine, and they're looking for a way to continue serving."
What does that mean, sir? It means that Martinez's background is none of your business.
Unless she chooses to make it your business. Your job is to focus on becoming the best Marine you can be, not to play detective with your fellow recruits. Rodriguez stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Here's what's going to happen, Johnson. You're going to stop harassing Martinez immediately. You're going to focus on improving your own performance instead of trying to undermine hers. And if I hear about any more incidents involving you and her, you'll find yourself recycled back to week 1 with a new platoon." "Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir," Johnson replied, but his tone suggested the issue was far from resolved in his mind. "Good. Dismissed." Johnson left the office feeling more frustrated than chastened. Rodriguez's protective attitude toward Martinez only reinforced his suspicions that there was more to her story than anyone was admitting. If anything, the conversation had convinced him that his instincts were correct. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own concerns. The combat exercise had forced her to reveal more of her capabilities than she had intended, and she knew it wouldn't be long before questions became demands. She had hoped to make it through basic training without having to explain her background, but that was looking increasingly unlikely. That evening, as the platoon settled into their bunks for another night of exhausted sleep, Sarah lay awake thinking about the conversation she had overheard between Chen and Williams. "I'm telling you, she moved like a professional," Chen had whispered. "Like someone who's been in combat before." "But she's only 22, Williams had replied. When would she have had time for that kind of training? Maybe she was in the reserves, or maybe she's been taking classes since she was a kid. Either way, I don't think Johnson's completely wrong about her having secrets. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. They were right, of course. She was hiding something significant, but their assumptions about what that something might be were so far from the truth that it would have been funny if the stakes weren't so high. The tattoo they were also curious about wasn't a gang symbol or a lover's name or any of the other theories they had developed. It was something much more serious, much more painful, and much more honorable than any of them could imagine. But it also represented a chapter of her life that she wasn't ready to share, especially not with people like Johnson who would use it against her. Some stories were earned, not demanded, and the trust required to hear her story hadn't been established yet. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Colonel Harrison, the base commander, would be conducting his monthly inspection of the recruit training program. All platoons would be evaluated, and individual performance reviews would be conducted with selected recruits. Rodriguez made the announcement during morning formation, his expression giving nothing away. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you get the honor of meeting Colonel Harrison. He's a decorated combat veteran who has served this country for over 30 years. You will address him as Sir, you will maintain perfect military bearing, and you will remember that his evaluation of this training program affects every Marine who comes after you." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest as Rodriguez continued his briefing. She had heard of Colonel Harrison, though she had never met him personally. His reputation preceded him as a man who had served with distinction in multiple combat theaters and who demanded the highest standards from everyone under his command. More importantly, Colonel Harrison was someone who might recognize her, or at least recognize what her tattoo represented. The question was whether that recognition would come at the right moment or at the worst possible moment. As the platoon prepared for inspection, Johnson saw an opportunity. If Colonel Harrison was as decorated and experienced as Rodriguez claimed, then surely he would be able to see through whatever deception Martinez was maintaining. All Johnson had to do was find a way to bring her to the colonel's attention. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal truths none of them were prepared for. The only question was, who would emerge victorious when the secrets finally came to light? Colonel Harrison arrived at Camp Pendleton at precisely 0800 hours, his staff car cutting through the morning heat like a shark through water. At 53, he carried himself with the bearing of a man who had earned every ribbon on his chest through blood, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication to the corps. His silver hair was regulation short, his uniform was perfectly pressed, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen the worst the war could offer and had never backed down. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez met him at the entrance to the training facility, snapping to attention with the kind of respect reserved for genuine military legends. Behind them, the recruit platoons formed up in perfect lines, each young Marine trying to embody everything they had learned about military bearing in their brief time at camp. "Colonel Harrison," Rodriguez said, "Platoon 2147 is ready for inspection, sir." Harrison returned the salute crisply and began his walk down the ranks. His inspection was thorough but fair, stopping to ask individual recruits about their training, their goals, and their understanding of Marine Corps values. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, the kind of personal attention that could make or break a young person's military career. Sarah Martinez stood in the third rank, maintaining perfect posture as the colonel worked his way through the formation. She could see Johnson 3 spots to her left, and she noticed the way his eyes kept darting toward her with an expression she had learned to recognize as dangerous. Whatever Johnson was planning, it was about to happen. Colonel Harrison reached her row and began his individual assessments. He questioned the recruit to Sarah's right about weapons maintenance, discussed leadership principles with the young man to her left, and then turned his attention to Sarah herself. "Recruit Martinez," he said, reading from the clipboard that Rodriguez had provided. "College graduate, excellent performance scores across all training metrics. What brings you to the Marines, recruit?" "Sir, I believe in serving something greater than myself," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the rapidly beating of her heart. "I want to be part of an organization that stands for honor, courage, and commitment." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Good answer. Your marksmanship scores are particularly impressive. Have you had prior weapons training?" It was an innocent question, the kind that any superior officer might ask a recruit who showed unusual aptitude. But Sarah could see Johnson's body tense with anticipation, and she knew that her answer would be scrutinized for any hint of deception. "Yes, sir, some informal training," she said carefully. "My father believed in teaching his children to be responsible with firearms." Again, technically true without being revealing. Harrison seemed satisfied with the answer and was about to move on when Johnson made his play. "Sir?" Johnson called out, his voice carrying across the formation with the kind of urgency that demanded attention. Harrison turned toward him, his expression neutral but alert. "Yes, recruit." "Sir, permission to speak freely about unit integrity concerns." Rodriguez's jaw tightened visibly. He knew exactly what Johnson was trying to do, and he also knew that it would be inappropriate to stop a recruit from voicing legitimate concerns to the base commander, even if those concerns were motivated by personal animosity. "Granted," Harrison said after a moment's consideration. "What's on your mind, recruit?" Johnson stepped forward slightly, his confidence growing now that he had the colonel's attention. "Sir, I believe that recruit Martinez may be withholding information about her background that could be relevant to her service record. She displays combat skills that seem beyond what would be expected from civilian training, and she refuses to explain the significance of visible tattoo markings that might indicate prior military or other organizational affiliations." The formation had gone completely silent. Even the drill sergeants seemed to be holding their breath as they waited to see how Colonel Harrison would respond to this unprecedented breach of recruit protocol. Harrison studied Johnson for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Recruit Johnson, are you making an accusation of fraud against a fellow Marine?" "Sir, I'm expressing concerns about unit integrity and the importance of complete honesty in military service." Harrison nodded slowly, then turned back to Sarah. "Recruit Martinez, do you have any response to these concerns?" Sarah felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes on her, along with the considerable presence of Colonel Harrison himself. This was the moment she had been dreading and preparing for since the day she arrived at camp. She could continue to deflect, continue to maintain her privacy, but something in Harrison's eyes suggested that he already suspected more than he was letting on. "Sir," she said quietly, "my service record speaks for itself. I have nothing to hide regarding my commitment to the Corps or my ability to serve honorably alongside my fellow Marines." "That's not what I asked," Harrison replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Recruit Johnson has raised questions about your background. Do you care to address them directly?" Johnson stepped forward again, emboldened by what he perceived as support from the colonel. "Sir, if I may, she's been evasive about these questions for weeks. All we're asking for is transparency from someone we're supposed to trust with our lives." Harrison held up a hand to silence Johnson, then walked directly up to Sarah until he was standing less than 2 feet away from her. At this distance, she could see the combat ribbons on his chest more clearly. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Combat Action Ribbon, and several others that told the story of a man who had served with distinction in some of the military's most challenging operations. "Recruit Martinez," he said, his voice now barely above a whisper. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Have you previously served in any branch of the United States military or any allied military organization?" "No, sir," Sarah replied honestly. "Have you ever been employed in any capacity by any government agency in a role that involved combat training or operations?" The question was more specific than she had expected, and Sarah hesitated for just a moment before answering. "No, sir, not in an employment capacity." Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly at her phrasing, but before he could follow up, Johnson interrupted again. "Sir, what about the tattoo? Don't we have a right to know what she's hiding under her collar? What if it's gang-related, or what if it indicates affiliations that could compromise unit security?" This time, Harrison turned to face Johnson with an expression that made several nearby recruits take an involuntary step backward. "Recruit Johnson, are you familiar with Marine Corps regulations regarding personal privacy and the rights of individual Marines?" "Sir, I understand that individual privacy is important, but—" "Then you understand," Harrison cut him off, "that no Marine is required to display or explain personal tattoos unless they violate military standards regarding extremist organizations or inappropriate content. Are you suggesting that Recruit Martinez's tattoo falls into one of those categories?" Johnson hesitated. He had no evidence that Sarah's tattoo was actually problematic. He was simply fishing for information and hoping to embarrass her into revealing something she wanted to keep private. "Sir, I just think that in the interest of unit cohesion, Harrison repeated, his voice taking on the kind of edge that suggested Johnson was treading on very dangerous ground. "Let me tell you something about unit cohesion, recruit. It's built on trust, respect, and the understanding that every Marine has earned their place through their actions, not through their willingness to submit to inappropriate scrutiny from their peers. The rebuke was clear, and Johnson's face flushed with embarrassment. But Harrison wasn't finished. However, he continued, turning back to Sarah, if Recruit Martinez is willing to share the significance of her tattoo, it might help address some of the questions that seem to be affecting unit morale.
Sarah felt trapped.
She could refuse, which was her right, but doing so would only fuel more speculation and potentially damage her relationships with the other recruits permanently. On the other hand, revealing the truth would mean exposing a part of her life that she wasn't sure she was ready to share, especially not in front of someone like Johnson, who would almost certainly misunderstand or misuse the information. But as she looked into Colonel Harrison's eyes, she saw something that changed her perspective. There was knowledge there, and recognition, and something that looked almost like respect. This wasn't a man who would use her story against her. This was a man who understood the weight of the secrets that warriors sometimes carried. Sir, she said finally, the tattoo represents a memorial to my brother, Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez, United States Army. He was killed in action in Afghanistan 18 months ago. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread throughout the formation. Several recruits shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that they had been witnessing something much more serious than they had realized. Colonel Harrison nodded slowly. What unit, recruit? 75th Ranger Regiment, sir. 2nd Battalion. Harrison's expression changed subtly, recognition dawning in his eyes. Michael Martinez. I remember reading about that action. He saved his entire squad at the cost of his own life. Posthumous Silver Star. Yes, sir. The colonel was quiet for a moment, processing this information and its implications. Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez had indeed been a hero, a young man who had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to his country. But that still didn't fully explain his sister's unusual capabilities or the depth of knowledge she had displayed in training. Recruit Martinez, Harrison said carefully, your brother's service and sacrifice are a credit to your family and to this country. But I suspect there's more to your story than family connection to military service. Am I correct? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that she had reached the point where half-truths and evasions would no longer suffice. Sir, my brother trained me extensively in combat techniques, weapons handling, and tactical thinking from the time I was 16 years old. He wanted to make sure that I could protect myself and others if the need ever arose. Extensively how? Sir, he taught me everything he learned in Ranger School and from his deployments. Hand-to-hand combat, advanced marksmanship, small unit tactics, survival skills. When he was home on leave, we would spend weeks at a time training together. Johnson's mouth fell open as the implications of this revelation sank in. Sarah Martinez hadn't learned her skills from casual civilian training or college programs. She had been personally instructed by one of the Army's elite special operations soldiers, trained to standards that exceeded what most Marines would achieve even after years of service. Colonel Harrison studied Sarah with new understanding. And the tattoo specifically? Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her collar, where the black ink lay hidden beneath the fabric. It's the Ranger tab, sir. The one my brother wore. I had it tattooed over my heart after his funeral, along with his dates of service and the Ranger motto. The silence that followed was profound. Every person in the formation was grappling with the realization that they had been in the presence of something much more significant than they had understood. This wasn't a college girl playing soldier, or a mysterious figure with questionable loyalties. This was the sister of a fallen American hero, carrying his legacy and his training into her own service to the country. Colonel Harrison straightened to his full height and rendered a slow, deliberate salute to Sarah Martinez. The gesture sent shockwaves through the formation as every recruit and drill sergeant realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Recruit Martinez, Harrison said formally, it is an honor to meet the sister of Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez. Your brother's sacrifice will never be forgotten, and his training has clearly prepared you well for service as a Marine. Sarah returned the salute with precision and dignity, her eyes bright with emotion, but her bearing still perfectly military. Thank you, sir. I'm here to honor his memory and to serve with the same commitment he showed. Harrison turned to address the entire formation, his voice carrying the authority of his rank and the weight of his experience. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just learned an important lesson about making assumptions and the danger of trying to force people to reveal private matters before they're ready. Recruit Martinez has shared something deeply personal with you, not because she owed it to you, but because she chose to trust you with her story. His gaze found Johnson specifically. Some of you owe this Marine an apology. All of you owe her your respect. She has earned her place here through her performance, her dedication, and the sacrifice of her family. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with me personally. The inspection continued, but the dynamic had changed completely. Word spread quickly through the other platoons about what had happened, and by evening, Sarah Martinez had become something of a legend among the recruits. The sister of a fallen ranger, trained by Special Operations Forces, carrying her brother's legacy into the Marine Corps. But for Sarah herself, the revelation brought both relief and new challenges. She had finally shared Michael's story, but now she would have to live up to the expectations that came with being the sister of a war hero. The mockery was over, but in its place came a different kind of pressure, the weight of representing something larger than herself. As she lay in her bunk that night, Sarah touched the tattoo through her shirt and whispered the words that had guided her since the day she decided to enlist. "Rangers lead the way, Mike. I'll make you proud." The revelation about Sarah Martinez's background created a seismic shift in the dynamics of Platoon 2147. Within hours of Colonel Harrison's inspection, the mockery and suspicious whispers had been replaced by a mixture of awe, respect, and in some cases, uncomfortable guilt. The recruits who had joined in Johnson's campaign of harassment now found themselves face to face with the reality that they had been tormenting the sister of a decorated war hero. Johnson himself had retreated into a sullen silence, his earlier bravado completely deflated by the magnitude of his miscalculation. During evening chow, he sat alone at the far end of the mess hall, picking at his food while avoiding eye contact with anyone, especially Sarah. The other recruits gave him a wide berth, recognizing that his position in the platoon hierarchy had shifted from alpha antagonist to social pariah almost overnight. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself in the unusual position of being the center of positive attention for the first time since arriving at boot camp. Recruits who had previously ignored her or actively participated in her harassment now approached her with awkward attempts at conversation and barely concealed requests for training advice. Private Chen was the first to approach her directly, waiting until she was alone at the weapons cleaning station before clearing his throat nervously. "Martinez," he began, then stopped, clearly struggling with how to phrase what he wanted to say. "I wanted to apologize for some of the things I said about you, about your tattoo and everything. I had no idea about your brother." Sarah looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, studying Chen's face for signs of sincerity. "You don't need to apologize for something you didn't know, Chen. But you might want to think about why you were so quick to assume the worst about a fellow Marine." Chen flushed red but nodded. "You're right. I guess I got caught up in Johnson's theories and didn't think for myself. That's not the kind of Marine I want to be." "Then don't be that kind of Marine," Sarah replied simply, returning to her weapon maintenance. "We all make choices every day about who we want to become." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Private Williams, who had been hovering nearby waiting for her chance to speak. Unlike Chen, Williams had never actively participated in the harassment, but she also hadn't done anything to stop it. "Sarah," Williams said, using her first name for the first time since they had met, "I wanted you to know that I think what your brother did was incredibly brave, and I think you're incredibly brave for carrying on his legacy." Sarah paused in her cleaning, considering how to respond. Williams' words were sincere, but they also represented the kind of hero worship that Sarah had been hoping to avoid. "Williams," she said carefully, "I appreciate your words, but I need you to understand something. I'm not here because I'm brave, and I'm not here to be a symbol of my brother's sacrifice. I'm here because I want to be a Marine, just like everyone else in this platoon. The fact that Mike trained me doesn't make me special. It just means I had a good teacher." Williams nodded, but Sarah could see that her words hadn't fully registered. The other woman was still seeing her through the lens of tragedy and heroism, rather than as an individual Marine trying to earn her place through her own efforts. This pattern repeated itself throughout the evening and into the following days. Recruits approached Sarah with a mixture of reverence and curiosity, asking about her brother's service, about her training, about what it was like to carry such a significant legacy. Each conversation was well-intentioned, but collectively they began to wear on Sarah in ways that the original harassment never had. The harassment had been unpleasant, but it was external pressure that she could deflect or ignore. This new attention was more insidious because it was positive and came from people who meant well. But it also threatened to define her entirely in terms of her relationship to her dead brother, rather than her own merits and aspirations. The situation came to a head during a particularly challenging training exercise in the 4th week. The platoon was conducting a night infiltration drill, moving through rough terrain in complete darkness to reach an objective without being detected by instructor opposition forces. It was the kind of exercise that separated competent Marines from exceptional ones, requiring not just physical stamina, but tactical intelligence and leadership under pressure. The platoon had been divided into 4 squads of 6 recruits each, with temporary squad leaders appointed by Drill Sergeant Rodriguez based on previous performance. Sarah had been made the leader of 3rd Squad, a recognition of her demonstrated tactical abilities, but also a test of whether she could translate her individual excellence into effective leadership of others. Her squad included Williams, Chen, Private Davis from Oklahoma, Private Thompson from New Jersey, and, ironically, Private Johnson. Rodriguez had deliberately placed Johnson in Sarah's squad, either to give him a chance at redemption or to test Sarah's ability to lead someone who had been openly hostile to her. As the squads prepared to move out under cover of darkness, Sarah gathered her team for a final briefing. The objective was simple in concept but challenging in execution. Infiltrate to within 50 meters of a mock enemy position, observe and report on their defensive arrangements, and extract without being detected. Failure meant starting over from the beginning and likely recycling the entire exercise for the rest of the platoon. "Listen up," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely audible over the night sounds of the California wilderness. "We know the opposition has night vision and motion sensors. That means we move slow, we move smart, and we communicate through hand signals only once we're within 200 meters of the objective." She had drawn a simple map in the dirt, using a red-filtered penlight to show the planned route of approach. "Davis and Thompson, you're our reconnaissance element. Chen and Williams, you provide security overwatch from this position here. Johnson and I will move to the observation point." Johnson spoke for the first time since the exercise had begun. "Why are you pairing with me? Don't you trust me not to screw this up?" Sarah looked at him directly, her expression serious but not hostile. "Johnson, I'm pairing with you because this mission requires the 2 most experienced members of the squad to get to the objective. Despite our personal issues, you're a good Marine when you focus on the mission instead of on politics." It was an olive branch, offered not out of forgiveness but out of tactical necessity and Sarah's understanding that leadership sometimes meant putting mission accomplishment ahead of personal feelings. Johnson was quiet for a moment, processing her words. "Martinez, before we start this thing, I need to say something." Sarah held up a hand. "Save it for after the mission, Johnson. Right now, the only thing that matters is not letting down our squad mates." But Johnson shook his head. "No, this needs to be said now. I was wrong about you. Completely, totally wrong. I thought you were some kind of fake, some college princess trying to play soldier. But you're more of a Marine than I am. And you have been since the day you got here." The admission clearly cost him something, and Sarah could see the sincerity in his expression despite the darkness.
"I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued, "but I want you to know that I'll follow your lead on this mission and any other."
"You've earned that and more." Sarah nodded once, acknowledging his words without comment. There would be time later to discuss forgiveness and redemption, but right now they had a job to do. The infiltration began smoothly, with the squad moving through the rough terrain like shadows. Sarah's training showed immediately as she guided them along routes that provided maximum concealment while avoiding the most obvious approaches that the opposition would be watching. Her years of training with Michael had taught her to think like both predator and prey, understanding how to move undetected through hostile territory. Davis and Thompson reached their reconnaissance position without incident, reporting back through hand signals that the approach route was clear. Chen and Williams established their overwatch position with good fields of fire and communication with both elements. Everything was proceeding according to plan when they encountered their first serious obstacle. The opposition had established a roving patrol between the squad's position and their intended observation point. 2 instructors with night vision equipment were moving in an unpredictable pattern, making it impossible to simply wait for them to pass before continuing the approach. Sarah studied the patrol pattern for several minutes, timing their movements and looking for weaknesses in their coverage. She could see a way through, but it would require precise timing and absolute silence from both her and Johnson. She moved close enough to Johnson to whisper directly into his ear. "Follow my lead exactly. When I move, you move. When I stop, you freeze completely. If they detect us, the entire platoon fails this exercise." Johnson nodded his understanding, and Sarah began the most challenging phase of the infiltration. Moving from shadow to shadow, timing their advances to coincide with the patrol's movements in the opposite direction, she led Johnson through a careful dance of concealment and patience that lasted nearly an hour. Twice they had to freeze completely as patrol members passed within arm's reach of their position. Once, Johnson accidentally kicked a loose stone and both instructors turned toward their location with weapons ready. Sarah and Johnson remained motionless for 15 minutes, until the patrol decided it had been a false alarm and continued their route. When they finally reached the observation position, both recruits were soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. But they had achieved their objective without detection, and now came the equally challenging task of gathering intelligence and extracting without being discovered. Sarah pulled out a small notebook and began sketching the defensive positions, weapon emplacements, and personnel movements that she could observe through her binoculars. The mock enemy position was more complex than the exercise briefing had suggested, with multiple layers of security and overlapping fields of fire that would make a frontal assault extremely costly. Johnson provided security while Sarah worked, and she was impressed by his focus and professionalism. Whatever personal issues existed between them, he was proving himself to be a reliable partner when it mattered most. The extraction proved even more challenging than the infiltration, as the opposition had increased their patrol activity and adjusted their routes to cover areas that had been safe during the approach. Sarah had to find an entirely different route back to the rally point, leading Johnson through terrain that tested every skill Michael had taught her about movement in hostile territory. They reached the extraction point just as the exercise time limit expired, breathing hard but successful in their mission. The rest of the squad was waiting for them, having maintained their positions and security throughout the operation. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting at the rally point with a stopwatch and a clipboard, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Third Squad, mission report. Sarah stepped forward and delivered a concise briefing on what they had observed, complete with her sketched intelligence and tactical assessment of the enemy position. Her report was thorough, professional, and demonstrated a level of tactical understanding that exceeded what Rodriguez expected from recruit Marines. "Outstanding work, Third Squad," Rodriguez said when she finished. "You were the only squad to successfully complete the infiltration, gather complete intelligence, and extract without detection. That's the kind of performance that wins battles and saves lives." As the platoon gathered for the march back to barracks, Johnson approached Sarah one more time. "Martinez, I meant what I said earlier. You're a hell of a Marine, and I'd be honored to serve alongside you when we graduate." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, seeing something in his expression that she recognized from her own mirror during the dark months after Michael's death. It was the look of someone who had made serious mistakes and was genuinely committed to doing better. "Johnson," she said finally, "we all came here to become something more than we were when we arrived. You're not the same person who got off that bus 4 weeks ago, and neither am I. What matters now is who we choose to become going forward." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something more valuable. It was a recognition that people could change, that redemption was possible, and that the bonds forged in shared hardship could overcome even serious personal conflicts. As the platoon marched back through the darkness, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since Colonel Harrison's inspection. The revelation about Michael had ended one chapter of her boot camp experience, but it had also begun another. Now she had to prove that she could be a leader, not just because of her brother's training, but because of her own character and commitment to the Marines around her. The tattoo over her heart would always remind her of Michael's sacrifice and the standards he had set, but increasingly, Sarah Martinez was writing her own story of service, honor, and the complex relationships that bound Marines together in their shared commitment to something greater than themselves. The final weeks of boot camp arrived with the weight of everything that had come before. Platoon 2147 had been transformed through 12 weeks of rigorous training, personal conflicts, revelations, and the kind of shared hardship that forged unbreakable bonds between Marines. As graduation approached, the recruits who had started as strangers from different backgrounds and with different motivations had become something more. They had become brothers and sisters in arms. Sarah Martinez stood in front of her wall locker, carefully arranging her dress blue uniform for the graduation ceremony that would take place the following morning. The dark blue fabric was pristine, the brass buttons gleaming with the kind of polish that reflected hours of meticulous care. Tomorrow, she would officially become a United States Marine, fulfilling the promise she had made to herself and to Michael's memory 18 months earlier. The transformation had been profound, not just for Sarah but for everyone around her. Johnson, once her chief antagonist, had become one of her most reliable allies and had emerged as a natural leader in his own right. Williams had founded confidence and was being recommended for advanced infantry training. Chen had discovered an aptitude for communications that would serve him well in his future assignments. But perhaps the most significant change had been in the way the platoon understood the meaning of service, sacrifice, and the responsibility that came with wearing the Marine Corps uniform. Sarah's story had given them all a deeper appreciation for what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves. The evening before graduation, Drill Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the platoon for their final formation as recruits. Tomorrow they would be Marines, but tonight they were still his responsibility, still the young men and women he had guided through the most challenging 12 weeks of their lives. Ladies and gentlemen, Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the same authority it had on their first day, but now tempered with something that might have been pride. Tomorrow you will graduate from Marine Corps boot camp. You will receive your Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, and you will officially join the ranks of United States Marines. The recruits stood at attention, but Sarah could see the emotion in their eyes as Rodriguez continued his final address. Some of you came here looking for direction. Some came looking for a challenge. Some came looking to prove something to yourselves or to others. All of you are leaving here as Marines, but more importantly, you're leaving here as a family bound together by shared experience and mutual trust. Rodriguez's eyes found Sarah in the formation. You've learned about honor, courage, and commitment not just as words to memorize, but as principles to live by. You've learned that true strength comes not from individual achievement, but from the willingness to sacrifice for your fellow Marines and for the mission. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering his final message. Tomorrow, when you put on those dress blues, remember that you're not just representing yourselves, you're representing every Marine who has worn that uniform before you, and you're setting an example for every Marine who will wear it after you. Make us proud. The formation was dismissed, and the recruits dispersed to their final preparations. But Sarah lingered, approaching Rodriguez as he gathered his paperwork. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, she said, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for this platoon, and I wanted to apologize for any disruption my situation may have caused. Rodriguez looked at her with the expression of a man who had seen many young Marines come and go, but who recognized something special in this one. Martinez, you don't owe me an apology. If anything, I owe you. I should have shut down Johnson's harassment earlier instead of hoping it would resolve itself. Sarah shook her head. No, sir, you handled it exactly right. Johnson needed to come to his own understanding of what kind of Marine he wanted to be. If you had simply ordered him to stop, he might have complied, but he wouldn't have learned anything from it. Rodriguez smiled, a rare expression that transformed his usually stern features. You're going to make an outstanding Marine, Martinez. Your brother would be proud of the leader you've become. I hope so, sir. That's all I've ever wanted. As Sarah walked back to the barracks, she reflected on how much her understanding of leadership had evolved over the past 12 weeks. When she had arrived at boot camp, she had thought leadership was about individual excellence, about being better than everyone else at every task. Michael had trained her to be exceptional, and she had assumed that would be enough. But the experience with Johnson and the rest of the platoon had taught her that true leadership was about bringing out the best in others, about creating environments where everyone could succeed, and about understanding that strength came from unity rather than individual superiority. The graduation ceremony itself was a spectacle of military precision and emotional intensity. Families filled the reviewing stands, many seeing their sons and daughters in uniform for the first time. The Marine Corps band played as the new Marines marched in perfect formation, their dress blue uniforms representing the culmination of months of sacrifice and dedication. Sarah's parents had flown in from Texas for the ceremony, and she could see them in the stands, her mother wiping away tears while her father stood at rigid attention, his own military background evident in his bearing. They had supported her decision to enlist even though they had worried about losing another child to military service. Colonel Harrison served as the reviewing officer for the ceremony, and when it came time for the traditional presentation of the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor to each new Marine, he made a point of personally presenting Sarah with her emblem. Private First Class Martinez, he said formally as he pinned the emblem to her uniform, you have earned the title of United States Marine through your dedication, leadership, and commitment to excellence. More importantly, you have honored your brother's memory and his sacrifice through your service. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt at this moment of achievement. Your brother served with distinction in the Army Rangers, Harrison continued, his voice quiet enough that only Sarah could hear. But I have a feeling that your service as a Marine will be equally distinguished. The Corps is fortunate to have you. After the formal ceremony, families gathered with their newly minted Marines for photographs and celebration. Sarah's parents embraced her with the kind of fierce pride that spoke of their understanding of what she had accomplished and what it meant for their family's legacy of service. Michael would be so proud, her mother whispered through her tears. You've honored him in the most beautiful way possible. Her father, a Vietnam veteran who had initially been skeptical of Sarah's decision to join the military, pulled her aside for a private conversation. Mija, he said, using the Spanish endearment he had called her since childhood. When you first told us you wanted to enlist, I was afraid you were doing it for the wrong reasons. I was afraid you were trying to follow Michael instead of finding your own path. Sarah waited for him to continue, knowing that her father was not a man who spoke lightly about such things. But watching you these past months, seeing how you've carried yourself, and how you've grown into a leader, I understand now that you weren't following Michael. You were following your own calling. You were becoming who you were always meant to be. The validation from her father meant everything to Sarah. He had been Michael's first teacher, the one who had instilled in both of his children the values of service, honor, and commitment that had shaped their lives. His approval represented not just parental pride, but recognition from a fellow warrior that she had earned her place in a long tradition of military service. As the celebration continued around them, Johnson approached Sarah and her family. The young man who had once been her chief antagonist now stood before her parents with obvious nervousness, but also with determination. "And Mrs. Martinez," he said formally. "I'm Private Johnson. I served in the same platoon as your daughter, and I wanted you to know that she's the finest Marine I've ever had the privilege to serve alongside." Sarah's parents looked at Johnson with curiosity, unaware of the history between him and their daughter. Sarah had never mentioned the harassment in her letters home, not wanting to worry them or diminish the significance of her achievements.
"Your daughter saved my military career," Johnson continued.
"She could have had me removed from the platoon for my behavior early in training, but instead she gave me the chance to prove that I could be better. She taught me what it really means to be a Marine, not through punishment or humiliation, but through her example of leadership and forgiveness." Sarah's mother looked at her daughter with new understanding, recognizing that there were stories from boot camp that had never been shared. Her father nodded approvingly, understanding without words that Sarah had faced challenges and overcome them in ways that honored their family's military tradition. After Johnson had moved on to rejoin his own family, Sarah's father turned to her with a smile. "You want to tell me what that was about?" Sarah gave him an abbreviated version of her conflicts with Johnson and how they had been resolved. Her father listened without comment until she finished, then nodded thoughtfully.
"You handled that exactly right, Mija."
"It would have been easy to use your authority to punish him, but you chose to help him become a better Marine instead. That's the kind of leadership that builds strong units and saves lives in combat." As the day wore on, Sarah found herself thinking about the future. Her next assignment would be to the School of Infantry for advanced training, followed by assignment to a Fleet Marine Force unit where she would serve as an infantry Marine. The path ahead was challenging and uncertain, but she felt ready for whatever it might bring. That evening, after her parents had returned to their hotel and the festivities had wound down, Sarah found herself alone in the barracks that had been her home for the past 12 weeks. Tomorrow, the new Marines would disperse to their various follow-on training schools and assignments, scattering across the Corps to begin their careers as fully qualified Marines. She took out a piece of paper and began writing a letter, not to her parents or friends, but to Michael. It was a tradition she had maintained since his death, writing to him about important moments in her life, as a way of keeping his memory alive and maintaining the connection that had been so important to both of them. "Dear Mike," she wrote, "today I graduated from Marine Corps boot camp and officially became a United States Marine. I know you would have preferred that I join the Army like you did, but I think you would understand why I chose the Marines. I needed to make my own path while still honoring everything you taught me." She paused, thinking about how to capture everything that had happened over the past 12 weeks, all the lessons learned and relationships forged. "You always told me that the hardest part of being a warrior wasn't learning how to fight, but learning how to lead others who might not be as prepared or as motivated as you are. I understand that now in ways I never did before. Leadership isn't about being the best individual performer. It's about helping others become the best version of themselves." The letter continued for several pages, as Sarah shared the details of her training, her conflicts and reconciliation with Johnson, and her hopes for her future service. But as she concluded, her thoughts turned to the larger meaning of what she had accomplished. "I know that some people will always see me as the sister of Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez, hero of Afghanistan. And I'm proud of that connection, proud to carry your memory with me wherever I go. But I also know that I've earned the right to be seen as Marine Private First Class Sarah Martinez, a warrior in my own right with my own story to tell." She touched the tattoo over her heart one last time, feeling the raised edges of the ink that commemorated her brother's service and sacrifice. "I'll always carry you with me, Mike, but I'm ready now to write my own chapter of our family story. Rangers lead the way, but Marines never leave a fallen comrade behind. I'll make you proud, hermano. I promise." As Sarah sealed the letter and placed it in her footlocker alongside the others she had written over the past 18 months, she felt a sense of completion and new beginning. The young woman who had arrived at boot camp carrying the weight of tragedy and the burden of living up to an impossible legacy had been transformed into a confident Marine, ready to serve her country with honor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow and lead, and new chances to prove that the lessons of boot camp had prepared her for the responsibilities of military service. But tonight, Sarah Martinez could rest in the knowledge that she had earned her place among the ranks of United States Marines through her own effort, her own character, and her own commitment to the values that made the Corps the elite fighting force it was. The mockery that had once threatened to define her boot camp experience had become a distant memory, replaced by the respect of her fellow Marines and the knowledge that she had overcome adversity through strength of character rather than through the advantages of her unusual training. She was no longer Michael's little sister playing at being a soldier. She was Marine PFC Sarah Martinez, ready to serve wherever her country needed her most. The eagle, globe, and anchor on her uniform represented more than just successful completion of boot camp. It represented her transformation from a young woman seeking to honor her brother's memory into a warrior ready to write her own legacy of service. The tattoo over her heart would always remind her of where she came from, but the uniform she wore proclaimed to the world where she was going. As she prepared for sleep in the barracks that would soon be filled with a new group of recruits beginning their own journey toward earning the title of Marine, Sarah Martinez smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her calling and was ready to answer it with everything she had to give.